Hello everybody, welcome to today's product safety webinar, which will tell us a bit about China's safety compliance. So the EU SME Center, for the ones who do not really know, is a project funded by the European Commission, which really helps small and medium-sized enterprises from Europe to do business in China, providing a range of information, advice, training and support services. So the center was established in October 2010 and is now running its second phase until July 2018. It's established by 6 implementing partners from China British Business Council, over the French Chamber of Commerce and the others you can see here. The center itself is located here. It's based in Beijing, and as I said already, it's implemented by the 6 chambers of commerces. In the past years, we have developed a strong content and expertise with, for example, more than 140 comprehensive market reports, guidelines and case studies. But we have also replied to 3,600 inquiries, covering more or less the 28 member states. We now have more than 10,000 registered users, and also trainings in the EU and China, and webinars like this one have been quite strong. We are very well connected in Europe and in China. So we work together with trade support partners, but also with experts in an expert network, and then with Enterprise Europe as a network partner. My name is Martina. I'm working in the EU SME Center as an expert for standards and conformity. I'm here in China since more than 10 years, not only working on standardization and conformity, but mostly on innovation and technology projects, or supply chain management, e-commerce and IPR in different sectors. Previously, I worked in very different positions in international companies, not only in China, but also in the UK, France and in the US. Today, we are talking about product safety in China, and I basically will cover 5 main topics or 5 areas. So firstly, I will introduce the market of consumer products. I will introduce the regulatory framework, as well as the main elements of the product safety system in China, followed by a practical guidance for small and medium-sized enterprises, and then some conclusions. So let's get started. The market of consumer products. In the last 10 years, China has become one of the largest and fastest growing markets for consumer products worldwide. So rapid growth in disposable income during the period of growth has created a middle class of more than 300 million consumers, and of course is still growing. Whilst the domestic industry is able to cover the needs of these consumers, there is nevertheless a high awareness of global brands and an increasing demand for high quality foreign consumer products. However, although IPR law has substantially changed the copycat culture, also because more and more Chinese are inventing themselves, one also can find the perfect 101 copies of a product where it is difficult to find out whether it's real or a brand. And then, of course, Chinese consumers are also quite price sensitive. So, what is determining the product safety in China, and how does the world look like if you would like to enter the Chinese consumer market? So product safety in China can be approached from different perspectives. So at one point you have like, how to say, the made in China, which sometimes has a certain reputation, which comes together with, the food and toy safety scandals, where it's very often not clear who to blame. And then on the other side you have the Chinese system, or AQSIQ, the Ministry of Quality and Safety Control, which has more than 1 million inspectors. So compliance, what does it mean for foreign consumer products? Particularly given the fact that currently e-commerce is one of the big sales channels from Europe. Overall, resuming some of the experiences here in the center, there are many examples of foreign small and medium-sized enterprises that have successfully built their own brands in China. However, besides the basic requirements, having an appropriate marketing concept, a good understanding of the Chinese consumers, and a quality product, this applies, I would say, universally. One has to initially focus on a small geographical area, and to keep investments under control. So sometimes, due to a history of low quality mass production, there is a general perception that imported consumer goods are superior, both in quality and design, to equivalent Chinese products, which of course would also justify higher prices. However, that's not always true, and still sometimes Chinese consumer goods are much more valued than foreign ones. On the other side, lifestyle changes and the rapid urbanization have further increased Chinese consumer fascinations for imported goods. So there is a huge market. What are points to consider if you would like to sell your products to China? So Chinese consumers' expectations are sometimes quite tough to meet. If a product fails the consumer expectations, the Chinese public is quick to place the blame on foreign producers. There are many channels for Chinese consumers to make their grievances heard, both in public media and in form of private messages posted on the internet. But then also, product compliance in China involves a combination of market access licenses, compulsory standards, voluntary labels, and the already mentioned expectations and assumptions of Chinese consumers. Regarding language, all instructions, displays, manuals, and so on must be provided in Chinese. This is both a legal requirement and an expectation of Chinese consumers. And then another very important point is the localization. Depending on the type of product and the target market, it is often necessary to tailor consumer products to the Chinese market. Not everything which works in Europe works here in China, and also very often this might be a legal requirement due to differing standards and homologation rules. Market access regulations are a topic, IP and design protection. And then, of course, if you're talking about market access, we will refer to it quite later. China is not a fully unified market. So many operations related to safety regulations and quality supervision of products are performed by provincial and local authorities. So depending on the product category, this may lead to variations in the interpretation of rules regarding compliance. Local differences, for example, may include additional standards addressing local needs, and in terms of the consumer's voice, there is a well-established system in place to which every Chinese citizen has access. The core element is a network of consumer complaint hotlines in operation throughout the country, giving people the opportunity to voice their concerns regarding any consumer product on the market. These hotlines are often monitored by local authorities, and it's their decision whether warrants are issued and further examinations are taking place. So consumers also can play part in the standardization process now in China. We come to this a bit later. And the voice of consumers is represented by consumer associations both on a national and on a provincial level. So in terms of the regulatory framework, which you can see here, there is, to start with, the product safety law. So the product safety law is has been revised. The first version from '93 has been revised in 2000, and its aim is to strengthen, of course, supervision and inspection of product quality, with the focus being on health and safety of consumers, of course. The law defines the obligations of producers, manufacturers, and distributors, as well as the government's obligations regarding supervision and inspection. Below the law, you find the different administrative regulations for supervision and services, but then also the ministerial orders in organizations' rules and regulations, and then all the normative documentation like compulsory standards, ministerial instruction, and so on. In this whole environment or universe, you start already to might find abbreviations like AQSIQ and so on. So here on this slide, you see some of the institutions you might bump into. So AQSIQ at the top is a ministry directly under the supervision of the State Council. The State Council tasks its administrative departments with managing the market supervision, accreditation, and standardization of their corresponding professional sectors. So AQSIQ has an overarching function to regulate, coordinate, and supervise the respective activities across all ministries. Then you can see left and right SAC and CNCA. So these are two vice ministerial government agencies: the General Administration for Standardization, SAC, and the Certification and Accreditation Administration of China, CNCA. They are directly subordinated to AQSIQ. Both bodies have regulatory power and control over all nationwide activities in their respective areas. And then I mentioned already provinces or regional levels. So at the regional level, provinces, autonomous regions, and so on, the regional government is in charge of implementing and administering the activities of AQSIQ. So most of the provinces have two authorities in place. One is the Bureau of Quality and Technical Supervision, and China Inspection and Quality Services, CIQ. So these provincial institutions are also in charge of practical operations of all market surveillance activities in China. There are many more other players, but since time is short, we cannot refer to everyone. The center has a publication on the who is who in terms of regulatory affairs to meet here in China. So the product safety law itself has elements. The scope of the legislation is defined as relating to products that are processed or manufactured for sale. It also includes projects of a limited time period, like, for example, construction projects, but not buildings. The key elements of the law are quite similar to the equivalent legislation in the EU and member states. So, for example, one of the points here, you can see that producers and vendors are responsible for product quality. They must establish an internal system to control the quality of products according to the relevant standards. but also in terms of forgery, misstatement of origin, fraudulent use of authentication marks, and other producers' names are all prohibited. So the law prohibits mixing impurities or imitations into a product for sale, selling fake products as genuine, and passing off defective products as meeting quality standards. So someone who does this probably can also count in high penalties for violators if it's enforced. And consumers can expect probably some damages which are caused by defective products. So under the law, really consumers have the right to make inquiries about product quality to producers and vendors as well. And consumer organizations also have the right to bring lawsuits or support individual consumers in doing so. So another part of this whole regulatory framework are standards. I've already mentioned them. So responsible for that is the Standard Administration in China. They are coordinating laws and regulations on standardization, as well as they do research and promotion of standardization policies. Whilst the SAC does not develop standards, it owns Chinese national standards, the mandatory ones, and coordinates and supervises the technical committees, of course, for standardization. So due to the prevalence of compulsory standards, administrative regulations do not play a major role in controlling product safety. Nevertheless, they are important for the implementation of compulsory certification and licensing schemes. So this means what you currently find in China is on the administrative level, the technical regulations. Then on a sub-administrative level, you see there are compulsory national standards. They still play a huge role. And then you find the voluntary national standards, but also sector and provincial standards. What is worthwhile to mention in this context is that China currently has like more than 3,700 compulsory national standards and approximately 3,000 compulsory sector standards. In addition, there are also a huge number of non-compulsory standards required for compulsory certification and licensing schemes. So, compulsory standards have the same impact and relevance for companies as any other technical regulation. Compliance with these standards is mandatory in China, even if they are not directly enforced by a certification or licensing scheme. Chinese standards are often modified versions of their respective international or globally accepted standard. It is thus quite important to identify the applicable compulsory standard and understand the differences between the Chinese standard and the international standard to which it refers. So there are changes to come in China's standardization. There will be a new standardization law formally issued by the end of 2017. The reform has been started because the government wanted to set up a system for coordinated development of government-oriented and market-driven standard. So the government very much improves or is aiming to improve the product quality, but also to support the industry's upgrading. So what does it mean? On the picture here, you can see on the left-hand side what I just said. You see the mandatory national standards and the voluntary standards. So you basically, on the left-hand side, you have mandatory standards, voluntary standards, and enterprise standards. And it will change into the new standard system on the right-hand side, which only has few mandatory national standards and these national standards will be drafted and approved by different ministries and SAC. So the ministries can draft mandatory national standards via the technical committees or expert groups. And then it's also planned to gradually integrate existing mandatory national, sector and local standards into mandatory national standards. So currently, in terms of progress, about more than 13,000 mandatory standards have been streamlined and evaluated. More than 50% of them are to be withdrawn or transformed into voluntary standards. The voluntary standards now include voluntary national standards, sector standards, and local standards, plus association standards, which is a new thing, and enterprise standards, reflecting the market-driven approach. So SAC, the Standard Administration of China, tries to optimize the structure of governmental voluntary standards like national standards, sector standards, and local standards. What's next? So the standardization reform will take place from 2016, so it has started already, until 2020. And the next thing is the national standardization strategy, which is currently drafted and will serve as a guideline until 2030. There will be an increased integration of standards and standardization in economy, politics, and ecology. And European companies should follow the developments and adapt their going-to-market strategy. So what does it mean? It means if you would like to enter the market, please follow a bit the strategy and what happens. Also observe sector standards and their role in the next few years, but also closely follow what's called social standards or association standards, and in terms of like their weight in the market. And then for foreign invested companies, whether based in China, we would recommend to join as much China standardization as possible. So, what are now the main elements of the system for product safety? China basically system is based on pre-market and post-market controls. On the pre-market side, here you can see there is a joint responsibility of government and economic operators and actions. As already mentioned, there are compulsory licenses for many product categories or labeling requirements. We are going to talk about CCC, China Compulsory Certification, a bit later. I have already introduced the different government entities, and I also refer to that the execution is done by the provinces for domestic products and by central authorities for imports. That's important to know. On a post-market side, the responsibility is with the provinces and municipalities. So of course you have to be compliant with compulsory standards. Then AQSIQ and China's Administration for Industry is responsible for coordination, but then there is also testing in approved testing labs which are appointed by the government, and then also there are export controls for high-risk products. So overall, the China pre-market and post-market controls, or the whole product safety system, includes customs inspection, administrative regulations to see the labeling, compulsory and voluntary standards, but also certification schemes like CCC, import licensing, then you did see market surveillance, and then of course export controls. In terms of market restrictions, companies that are thinking of exporting to China for the first time should research about the various catalogs existing. Nowadays everything is in a catalog or just not. So to get an understanding and a good instruction or introduction, the center has published guidelines on, for example, how to export products to China. So those catalogs basically define the scope of products which are prohibited or restricted, the products requiring a certificate or another license, inspection certificates or other test certificates, and so on. So market regulation usually is quite a top challenge for European small and medium-sized enterprises. So what happens to products that are not compliant? So in customs, very often the product will be halted, investigated by CIQ. In any case, it will be quarantined. And then serious cases, they will be destroyed and fined. If it's less serious, then they're getting shipped back to the sender. If compliant, then they are released from customs. So that's in terms of customs. In terms of market surveillance, if non-compliant products are found, usually there is a request for rectification or stop selling or even a product recall. For the company, this means then certainly an increased inspection regime. Also, the production process in China is very often requested for changes. And then sometimes in severe cases there is a recall of production and importation licenses. So this is just a reminder to be cautious when talking about compliance and what's the impact on the product and on the company. So as I mentioned, the majority of products, particularly consumer products, need to undergo some kind of certification or licensing before being allowed to enter China. If the products are produced in China, the same applies for these products to be permitted to be sold within the country. So it's not that this is only for European or foreign small and medium-sized enterprises or enterprises in general. If a product needs to get CCC, then it's for everyone. Certification and licensing systems are overseen by various ministries, as I have tried to introduce. The same ministries are responsible for the respective regulations. However, these systems are all based on the compulsory national and sector standards described before. Most of these systems are sector-specific. A few cover many different product types and sectors, most notably the China Compulsory Certification System, CCC, where here on the slide you see a rough overview of the process. So the China Compulsory Certificate, or CCC, or Free C certificate, is implemented since 2003, established to comply with the WTO TBT requirements. As mentioned, everyone falling under the CCC catalog, the certificate is compulsory for imported and domestic products, and therefore manufacturers and importers must understand the requirements. The process overall includes different steps, such as the application, documentation, and then, as seen here, the sample submission and the type testing. There is an initial factory inspection required for all manufacturers falling under different risk categories. There will be an evaluation, and then of course you get the CCC mark and you can do the labeling after the approval. What's worthwhile to mention is that the CCC certificate is now valid for 5 years, and then you have to go through re-certification. The center has published a guideline on CCC in general and on CCC for automotive parts. You might want to check out if you are more interested in CCC details. Besides China compulsory certification, there are more labels depending on your product. There is, for example, the compulsory energy label or the MIIT license for telecom equipment. There is also one for MIIT approval for radio signal emitting devices, which is called SRRC, or of course there is the CFDA certification for medical devices and pharmaceuticals, and many more. So in terms of practical guidance for SMEs, there are a few steps to consider, which I would like to introduce here. So we do think that a systematic approach is required to find a proper path through the maze of Chinese compliance regulations. Such an approach should cover not only the products themselves, but also the most common components and relevant spare parts if required. Depending on the responses to the questions above, it may be also advisable to source some of the components in China rather than subjecting existing components to a complicated and costly certification and licensing process. But this really depends on the individual situation. There is very often not one size fits all solution. So questions to ask in terms of step-by-step compliance is: does my product fall under the catalog of prohibited or restricted goods? Does the product fall under the scope of the product quality law? So is it listed in the CCC catalog for products requiring compulsory certification? If so, these certificates must be obtained before the products can be placed on the market. Sometimes you also need a special license, or there are other compulsory certifications, licensing or labeling schemes around. And then what compulsory and voluntary standards do apply for my product? So the first approach should be to ask which international or globally accepted standards apply to the product, and if so, what the Chinese equivalent of this international standard is. Very often, in the absence of any international standards, it is advisable to search for the Chinese equivalent of the applicable European or national standard. Other questions are, is there any voluntary certification and labeling scheme besides the mandatory one? So China has a huge array of voluntary product safety and environmental schemes. Some of them are administered by the government, others involve private labels. Depending on the client and market, it may be advisable to obtain such voluntary certificates and labels, but that's also really very based on individual cases. Also very important is the product documentation, compliant in terms of manuals, instruction, logos, labels, and so on. Is it compliant with Chinese regulations? So Chinese product safety regulations require that all relevant information is written in Chinese and that the symbols used are in line with the requirements outlined in the Chinese standard GPT 16273.1, which are different to those outlined in standard ISO 7000-2014. Many compulsory licenses are linked to an official logo or label. These logos and labels must follow the applicable regulations, so in some cases a special permit is required to ensure compliance. Toys are a good example actually as a product category for CCC. So the CCC catalog actually lists 6 toy categories to be certified and to carry the CCC logo before the toy can be sold in China. So electric, plastic and metal toys need CCC, as well as child carriers, lounging toys or dolls. Whereas toys out of paper, wood, textile, glass or ceramic toys do not need CCC. For most toys, the most important mandatory standard is the GB 6675 from 2014, defining the safety requirements. And this standard is consisting of 4 parts, addressing basic safety concerns, physical flammability and chemical safety. So if we are talking about what key points to consider in terms of market access and regulation, we do think that compliance in the European Union does not imply compliance in China. This means if you sell your product in the EU market or beyond, and it works very well, this does not automatically mean that you can sell it here in China. You should be aware of the standards that are used here in China, and then of course very often the differences to the respective international or European standard. This is an experience we would like to share. We had with very many SMEs coming here to China. It also helps if the importer or distributor of goods into China is familiar with the key elements of the whole product safety system, the standards and everything which is included. Importers here must be able to document properly the safety of the products. That's a key. And then very often companies do not pay attention to the details of documentation to really, for example, ensure that instructions are in Chinese. Sometimes labels that have to be in Chinese in terms of font or are just completely incorrect, and this is the reason why things are rejected in customs. So we really recommend to never ship a product before all licenses and certificates are secured. So to conclude, the system is very different from Europe. What I said, if it works in Europe, this doesn't necessarily mean it works here in China, particularly in terms of compliance. Although there is a standardization reform going on and China aims for more market-driven standards, compulsory standards still will play a key role to compliance. So it's worthwhile to know them. This means very often that to navigate the whole system successfully, this really requires expertise on the ground in China. Very often we find that small and medium-sized enterprises only have a small series. So if you really have to go through the CCC certification for only a few pieces, then you really should take into consideration the cost, but also the time to market. Very often certification takes much longer than the time you just did see of 9 months for very many reasons. The process can be controlled with the support of experts from home or here on the ground in China. Yeah, I think that's it basically. Thank you very much for your attention to this webinar about product safety in China, which you will find on our website if you register using the link you can see here. There are more publications related to other industries and areas important to know when entering the China market. So reports and guidelines and other useful information. In case of further questions, please do not hesitate to ask the question via the Ask the Expert button you can see here. And then thank you very much again. You can follow us here on WeChat. You can see the website, and thank you very much again, and have a great day.